yesterday.
Okay,
I knew
we
when I
are
seen it.
live, everybody, as soon as Julinna walks away. We are live.
There we go. All right.
Back. Welcome to this live stream. This is the second one we've done on critical race theory, and we've got some great guests for you tonight. So, you know, I put their bios in the event and have promoted them on the page leading up to today, but I'll go ahead and just reintroduce myself. My name is Ashlyn. I'm the co-founder of Grants Student Action Together, along with Julinna Oxley. Say hi, Julinna. Yeah. Okay, awesome. And then we have Professor Todd Couch from Francis Marion University. We have Professor Danny Malone, who is from Coker University. Shout out to Mel Hyman for the recommendations. Always love getting connected to new people. And then we also have Dr. Aaron Griffin, who is from Denver, Colorado right now. And he focuses on K through 12. So we've got a very interesting mix of people here tonight, and I will let them just go ahead and say one or two sentences about themselves and their work, and then we can go ahead and jump right in. And we can start with you, Danny.
Oh, great. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Danny Malone, Assistant Professor of Sociology and Criminology at Coker University. Just finished my 5th year. My areas of interest, there's a various amount of areas, but generally race, gender, class, demography. I also do some work in criminology. And other than that, I enjoy being in a classroom, teaching and being with my students, and just watching them become the best versions of themselves.
Wonderful, wonderful. Professor Couch, go ahead and go next and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Dr. Todd Couch. I'm a assistant professor of sociology at Francis Marion University. I largely do a lot of my work focused on race and ethnicity, but I'm also doing some current research looking at social movements, particularly religious social movements. I'm focused on social justice. In addition to my work in sociology, I also do a lot of things with the African and African American Studies program at FMU.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for joining us tonight. And we have Dr. Aaron Griffin. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and your work.
Well, great afternoon, everyone. Aaron Griffin, Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at DSST Public Schools in Denver, Colorado. I'm also CEO and co-founder of Prosperity Educators LLC, independent consulting company with my wife, the newly cemented Dr. Kay Griffin, as of yesterday. My work in my network entails working with 15 of our schools. We're a CMO, a charter management organization, housed inside Denver Public Schools. We have 15 total schools plus a home office. So my work is really supporting as a thought partner with their staff and professional development, curriculum design, working as a cross-functional partner on work stream design, making sure that diversity, equity, inclusion is core. My research areas or areas of focus are diversity, equity, inclusion, African American educational lobbying, multiculturalism, cultural responsiveness and relevance, and a multitude of other areas. Sometimes I just jump in other areas as the time fits.
Love it. I love jumping in. That's where we're doing it. Jumping in the deep end. You got to do that sometimes to move the needle.
Yep, yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's so great to have all of you with us tonight. You can tell audience that we have a highly esteemed and highly qualified group of folks to talk with tonight about the purported topic of critical race theory. And Ashlyn's already done one other live stream on critical race theory. And I think the conclusion that that everybody kind of came to is that critical race theory is one thing, and then what the bills are targeting in the discussion is another thing. And so one of the things I've been trying to figure out is like, what is exactly being targeted here? And so that's kind of the question that I have for you guys. When I look at the bills that are being proposed, they range from general, like you can't use stereotypes. You can't use the word victim and oppressor. Like you can't talk about, I don't know what social forces. You can't maybe mention the history of slavery to like really specific, like the 1619 Project. And then like there's kind of like everything in between. And some people mention critical race theory, and I've tried to explain to people, that I'm in conversation with, that I teach various philosophies of race, and I teach at my areas of specializations ethics, so I teach about racism every semester. I don't teach critical race theory except for my philosophy of law class. Like it's a real specific theory, and like I feel like it's become a punching bag. So I'm just wondering what y'all's read on this situation. What do you think is going on? I'll start with whoever wants to jump in.
I'll go ahead and start.
Go ahead,
So,
Dr. Malone.
Sure. So I think any honest conversations should start with defining the subject, right? So the subject here is critical race theory. So what I'm going to do is just give you exactly what critical race theory is from the actual, introductory text. I think it's very important because what we are seeing is individuals slanting, misrepresenting, distorting what critical race theory is, but yet no one's actually gone to any text to provide a definition. So I want to do that to kind of lay the field for us. So what is CRT, or critical race theory? It's a collection of activists and scholars interested in studying and transforming the relationship between race, racism, and power. It first emerges as a challenge. The challenge the idea of the United States has become a colorblind society where one's racial identity no longer had an effect on one's social economic status. And so this is just 2 decades after the accomplishments of the civil rights movement, and we saw many politicians, institutions co-opting the aspirational colorblind language of MLK, where we should judge someone by the content of the character rather than the color of skin, while omitting the more critical aspects of his speech that emphasized racial discrimination and economic inequality. Moreover, critical race theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, the Enlightenment, rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law. So this comes directly from this text, just to give us a kind of playing field to deal with. But if we're going to talk about a scholar who actually uses this, he also asserts that CRT can be approached, used to theorize, examine, and challenge the ways in which race and racism implicitly and explicitly impact social structures, practices, and discourses. In this movement, it's just not about theory building, because people like to say, oh, it's just a theory. Well, no, people actually try to put this into practice. And so there's a practitioner piece where once a situation is adequately understood, then CRT scholars develop strategies to help the situation to transform society along racial lines and hierarchies for the better. And so, yes, CRT thus puts an emphasis on outcomes, not merely an individual's beliefs, and calls on these outcomes to be examined and rectified. So I believe this is very important to set the stage in regards to the conversation. But in respect to what are they after? Well, what CRT will tell you is that, when there's racial progress, there's always going to be this pushback. And what we see now is with these protests and civil unrest and things of that nature, there's a fear of losing power and things of that nature. And so what we're seeing here is a pushback from it. We're actually getting a lot of the Southern strategy. We're getting just a different layer of it. And so you're getting a lot of dog whistles that are supposed to elicit white fear, to galvanize those who feel disenfranchised, to push back against the progress that we're starting to see as far as things along the racial lines, things of that nature. But I'll stop now so my panelists can chime in.
So as far as what is being targeted, I would actually suggest that what's being targeted is rather simple. It's votes. That this is not necessarily a matter of critical race theory. And I'm glad that we start from that point, that this is not about CRT. But if we look at the various bills that have been proposed, as well as some of the conversations taking place with school boards or parents going to school board meetings, there's a wide range of issues that individuals are upset about that definitely touch on race and ethnicity, but there are questions and concerns that are being raised about the way gender is discussed, sexuality, social class, even religion. And so it's not necessarily purely focused on race, the way in which things are being drafted or the comments and concerns that are being raised. The reason why I say I think it relates back to votes is if we look back to where this really came back into popular discourse, it was back during the 2020 presidential election, whenever we saw the former president throwing anything at the wall to try to get votes, to try to create a certain level of moral panic that will allow people to turn out at the polls. And so right now, I think what we're seeing is kind of this moral panic being used at three different layers. On one hand, we have it occurring on the national level, that we have the Republican Party really still trying to speak to those same people that former President Trump was trying to attract. On a state level, we have state level politicians trying to get those same votes because they want to stay in office or potentially move up to the national level. The school board is a political entity in and of itself. So you have school board members who are trying to get elected so that they can then move on to the next step in the political structure. But then the interesting group for me are really parents, because parents aren't necessarily trying to play the political game, and they're not necessarily trying to get people to turn out and vote for them. That parents are really concerned about what it is their children are being taught. However, the average parent doesn't have time to sit around and read Derek Bell's book. They're trying to feed their families and work their jobs. And so really the same way that we had this kind of massive misinformation strategy pushed out relative to COVID and vaccines and things of that nature, the same misinformation campaign is taking place relative to CRT. And so we're having moms and dads who are consuming this stuff, believing that CRT is telling their children that family structures need to be dissolved and that religions are just cults and that their faith doesn't mean anything. And then they're going to the school boards. And so it's this interesting kind of multi-level thing that we're living in right now, where I think on the national scale and a state scale, it's very much political. But then on a more local scale, again, parents raising their children, what it is I think we're looking at is parents grappling with what they believe their children are being taught that runs so counter in many ways to the ways and the narratives and the mythology that they learned as kids, and trying in some way to reconcile those differences that are occurring. So yeah, I think we're right that it's not necessarily critical race theory that's the thing. It's rather being treated as a bit of an umbrella and a scapegoat for anything remotely deemed as progressive.
I'm in total agreement with Dr. Malone and Dr. Couch. And one of the things that critical race theory espouses is that, think about the history of what's going on. Let's look at the historical context. And whenever I have this conversation with individuals about critical race theory, I like to give specific examples. Like, what's happening right now is not new. To Dr. Malone's point, every time there is a racial or social uprising or tension, there's always a backlash. It's the law of physics. This is emotional physics, this is safety physics, this is Maslow physics, this is whatever you want to call it. So you can go all the way back to 1645 with Bacon's Rebellion, when poor white folks and free Black people and some slaves rebelled against wealthy landowners. And immediately, the wealthy landowners set about to deliberately ensure that there was a separation between enslaved and indigenous and free Blacks and poor whites. You're with us. Then we go to 1740 and we have the Stonewall Rebellion in South Carolina. When that was done, the first thing South Carolina did was pass anti-literacy laws, because using the Bible as a reference, an educated person is unfit to be a slave. Okay? Then we go to the 1800s. Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, Gabriel Prosser, more anti-literacy laws. So every time there's been some type of racial unrest, there are laws put in place. So for anyone listening, this is what the 1619 Project talks about. Specific laws that you can Google that were written to ensure that free Africans, enslaved Africans, and Native people could not learn to read and write. And the language used in the preamble was if they learn to read and write, not these exact words, it will cause insurrection and revolt. Sound familiar? That when people learn these things, it causes them to revolt and hate their country. Same language, same jargon. All you have to do is Google it. So it is the same thing again. And this week, as I was preparing for this, I had two epiphanies. Number one, the reason for all of this, going to where Dr. Couch was talking about, if we look at May to August of 2020, when you saw Black Lives Matter protests, it wasn't just Black people. What you saw were all economic groups, all sexualities, all ethnicities and races. And when you saw affluent white children and poor white children and Asian children going home screaming Black Lives Matter and wanting to address race in the home, if our teachers are still being trained on how to address social unrest, if we have parents who don't know how to do that, imagine the stress and the tension they're feeling, that fear. So then we have people building on that fear, and throughout the history of the United States, the battleground has always been fought in the classrooms, in education. Every major event in this country, Sputnik, Brown v. Board of Education, the National Defense and Education Act, the anti-literacy laws have all been fought in the classroom for indoctrination, for indoctrinated patriotism. So that's why education is being attacked, because that is the battleground. If we can convince parents and the community that teachers are incompetent and incapable of teaching children, so they would rather focus on divisive issues, that's what the Nation at Risk did in 1983. That report, A Nation at Risk, said that teachers can't teach. So here we are again in 2021, and the whole message is your teachers aren't teaching. What they're doing is indoctrinating. So once again, and then I'm gonna close on this because I want y'all to think about this. When COVID-19 shut down the country, it wasn't political leaders who solved what to do in education. It was teachers, it was principals, it was education solved all of this. But now here we are in a moment of racial and social reckoning, gender and sexuality reckoning, and now teachers and principals and superintendents and professors aren't competent enough. We solved the COVID-19 issue with feeding children and educating children and going to teach online within a week, but we're not competent enough to have a conversation about the history of our country. So that's what this is big. This is about votes. This is about fear mongering. And for anyone listening, it is a sad state when the way you win a vote is through fear. No one should ever vote out of fear. We should be voting for what is best for this country, not voting because you were touching my Maslow's lowest hierarchy of need. My safety is in jeopardy. And that is deliberate. They are focusing on people's safety, their sense of safety and belonging. And that's why we're getting so much of this backlash.
So I just want to say those y'all all gave amazing answers. So I feel like now that you've said it, I'm like, yeah, that's exactly right. How come I didn't think of that? But I think you're exactly right that there's a lot of backlash going on. It's a way to galvanize people. When I read like right-wing descriptions of critical race theory, they link it with Marxism. And I'm like, well, does anybody really understand material conditions? Like, the material conditions matter, but if you want to debate like what that means, but nobody knows what that means. Like, nobody understands. But it's like you hear, oh, well, it's communism, it's Marxism, it's we're trying to, and it's like, where are you getting all this stuff? And so it's like they're doing everything they can to tie critical race theory to everything else bad ideologically that the United States stands for in order to discredit it. And it's like nobody, very few scholars, right, are well suited to debate all this stuff. Y'all are, right? But like, the point is that nobody else is doing that. That's not what they're doing. They're not even really wanting to have a discussion about it. It's just about wanting to control the narrative about what America's history has been. And when I went up through school, it was whitewashed, and that's the right word to use, because it is washing the history clean of all the dirty bad deeds so that white people look good. And so, that was the history. And it's like, maybe is that what they're saying? That's what they want the history to be. They want it to be the whitewash history, where I was never taught about the Tulsa Race Massacre, when I was never taught all about, the Denmark Vesey, rebellion, or any of these things, which you have to go on and learn later on, either in college or else on your own. So I just want to say that all of y'all's answers just seem real spot on.
And can I add on to what
yeah,
you're saying?
Go
So
ahead.
when we're talking about indoctrination, again, as I was preparing for this, what I found was something that I didn't learn in school, but the United Daughters of the Confederacy, like, they were a big propaganda machine after the Civil War was lost and the South were in the feelings because, they lost their economy, lost their life, and all those types of things. And so what this organization did was they were in charge of writing history books. So of course, when you're writing the history books, you're not going to say, oh yeah, we lost it. No, these were men of valor and all these different stories that swept through the South. So South Carolina's in there, Tennessee's in there. And also during the same time, we have to think about why it makes sense now when we're talking about taking down these monuments. Well, who do you think started putting those monuments up? It was in that same time period where a lot of these Confederate monuments were going up. And so, and if you read some of these texts, this is where we get the super whitewashing. Well, the slaves were happy, and
Right.
and actually slavery was the first type of social security in America. Like, this is really in those books. And if you're watch these media shows, I think her last name is Ruffin. Was it Amber Ruffin? So she even, does her skit, and South Carolina's always kind of has to be the butt of the joke. And she highlights like something from one of those South Carolina textbooks. And I'm just like, wow. So the indoctrination, like, if we're talking about education, as Dr. Griffen is saying, like, the place where everything is happening, yes. And so this is why it's important. I think this is why CRT is important, is that CRT provides a corrective. It's saying, like, we need to be honest. We need to bring in more voices. One of the tenets is counter storytelling. So bring in the voices of the experiences of the different Asian groups in America, because we got the Chinese Exclusion Act. How much do we talk about that with Native Americans? When do we talk about the Indian Removal Act or the Dawes Act? Why aren't we talking about that? If it's Latinos, specifically Mexicans, are we talking about the Basorio Act, right? The Basorio program. And so all these different groups have histories in the United States, but how much in our classes are we highlighting them to really tell the story of America, the good, bad, and the ugly?
I definitely want to add to what Dr. Malone just said, because if someone's listening and you heard Dr. Malone said the Chinese Exclusion Act, and you hear people, and I wrote this word down because I was with the Spurs a couple of days ago and we talked about this, and someone would say, yeah, but Chinese Americans are doing well. Okay, so let's talk about the model minority and how people are using the model minority myth to combat this, to say CRT is racist and say that CRT is anti-Asian. Really? So which anti-Asian are you talking about? Because when you look at the model minority myth, the first countries you think of are China, Japan, South Korea, India. We're not talking about Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos.
Laos, right.
If you look at these countries and these peoples in the United States, there is a wealth gap between those groups within the Asian community.
Right.
So when we start to say Asian Americans or Asian people are doing well, not all of them.
Yeah.
So critical race theory unpacks that. Like, why is it certain groups in the Asian community, the AAPI group, are doing extremely well and others are not? Why is it that in the Asian American student group, they are underrepresented in special ed? Underrepresented in special ed. See, that's what critical race theory, when you look at it through the lens and that framework, you start to look at that dichotomy right there. You start to look at that binary. And then, and I'm going to end with this, going back to Dr. Malone saying, where folks are saying what Dr. Martin Luther King said, that's a model minority. So now we're going to use a man who went through the civil rights movement and was ultimately assassinated and murdered. We're going to use the quote that actually got, one of the quotes that got him killed. We're going to use that. But we're not going to use the entirety of his speech where he speaks against capitalism. And people say CRT is a leftist liberal. Actually, one of the tenets is unpacking liberalism and the problem with liberalism. See, if people would read and go find out that CRT actually unpacks liberalism. And Dr. Martin Luther King talked about the problems with the liberal. That's why it's important for people to read. Take the time to read and study and understand that this is bigger than critical race theory. And when you start throwing up these models, you are proving the framework of critical race theory correct.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got just one thing, because he brought up the myth of model minority. Do we even know where that comes from? So I think this is around 1966. Is a New York Times article. This guy writes on these recent celebrations of the Chinese, and it becomes like it's something in the academy to actually combat progress, racial progress from these other groups. And so this becomes a way to stymie, to say, hey, look, these folks are doing well. Why aren't you doing, well? So Claire Jean Kim actually talks about this as racial triangulation in her book, Bitter Fruit, that looks at the Black Korean conflict in New York City. And so this is important, though. This is important with CRT and just in our nation. So when you're being propped up as a model minority, beware that you're actually probably a part of a larger scheme, that you may be, used against another group. All the while the ruling elite are just, playing puppets and politicking and positioning you. So I think that's important to also highlight in regards to the minority myth, model minority myth.
All right, that sounds super interesting. Thanks all for explaining that. So another question, and we can sort of let this be loose and flow, but I want to just sort of give us some questions so we can think about these things. I guess one question I have is like, is it possible for us to define like our goal in teaching racial history, or like what should be the goal when we're teaching this? And I think one of I like what you said, Dr. Griffen, about that the classroom is like the battleground, in other words, for like ideology. And in some ways, like I'd like to believe that I could indoctrinate my students, but I can't, right? But I also get them in college and they're definitely not, it takes a semester to persuade people to believe something, but indoctrination, no, definitely not possible. But, so one of the things that I notice in some of these bills is that they talk about different strategies for how to teach race. And so some things, like I hear some complaints, right, about how race is being taught and that people start feeling uncomfortable and that the teachers, don't do anything to sort of comfort or whatever, to deal with all the challenges that people are having when they're learning about, for example, white privilege. So I guess I'm wondering, and maybe we can start with you, Dr. Couch, like, what is your opinion about what resources teachers should be given or in order to teach this material, like I find that like if you have a large class size, for example, that's really hard to like have a more intimate conversation about these things. And talking about like racial history of the United States is harder than talking about white privilege, for example. So like what are some strategies? What do you think? How should we approach this?
So I think the most important part is determining what your role or what your goal as the educator is for that moment. That I think sometimes when I started teaching, goodness, almost 10 years ago now, I wanted to go in and like change the world in the classroom in one like semester. And I quickly found out that's not the way things actually work. And so I think setting a realistic expectation or a realistic goal for what it is you want to come out of that class time. And so often for myself, if I'm teaching, actually I taught race and ethnicities just wrapping up today during summer class. The big goal in that class for me is to get students just to start to think critically, to get them to start to turn some of those wheels that they've never even used before. And for some students, it will continue past there, and they will continue to want to take more classes and find additional readings and things of that nature. And for some, it's going to stop when the semester ends. And so I think as an educator, part of my own self-care is being okay with that. That if you don't walk out of this class wanting to go protest or demonstrate, there's nothing I can do to make you do that. That the most that I can do in many instances is just to get you to start to think critically. I think back to my graduate chair, Joe Fagan, and I talked to him many times, and he's been teaching, 40 something years now. And he said in his experience, it takes several years of intensive, like critical thinking type classes to get students to want to actually do anything. And so if you have a student for 15 weeks, realistically, the likelihood of them wanting to take that next step is pretty slim. So I think setting those realistic expectations is good. But also, I think it's important that we meet students where they are. One thing that's become very, very clear to me as I teach various inequality type classes is that whenever we present students with some of this challenging information, that they can really do one of two things. That they can shut down and just say, I'm not going to engage anything that you're doing, and a fair amount do that. But then we get the other side that will say, okay, I'm willing to go on this journey with you. But whenever we ask them to come with us, we have to recognize what we're asking them to do. We are asking them to ask themselves tough questions about what it is they've been taught their whole lives. Well, my grandpa taught me this thing, but if grandpa's a racist, how can I think about my relationship to that person now? And so we are asking students to unpack multiple things. And so it's not just, I want to teach you this racial history. I think it starts to hit students on a very personal level. And we have to be able to walk with them to some degree through that. Now, if you have a class of 200 students, that becomes a lot more difficult. And that perhaps best practices and having those types of conversations should make them only exist in spaces where we can actually sit down and talk about what it is that we're doing. Again, that deep reflection, that kind of self-work that this type of conversation tends to require that we have with students.
That's great. Thank you. Either one.
I'll let Dr. Griffen,
Okay.
I was leaving it to you, Dr. Malone. All right, thank you. So from the P12's perspective, and thank you, Dr. Couch, you touched on some things that I wanted to touch on as well. So here's the point of these conversations. Number one, you don't teach race. We don't just go in and say, let's learn about race. No one's teaching race. So let's be clear. No one is teaching racism, because to teach something is an outcome. So if I teach you math, the goal is for you to calculate. So if I teach you racism, the goal is for you to be a racist. No one's teaching racism. No one's teaching race. Okay, here, I've taught you race, go decide what race you're gonna be. No one's doing that. So let's get out of that pragmatism. No one's doing that. Okay. What's happening is when we have conversations around race, sexuality, gender, the history of this country, there are three outcomes: acknowledge, value, and appreciate. Not understand. As a former assistant principal and principal, the people, if they're watching this, they remember me walking into the classroom saying, don't put understand in your objective because it is not measurable. You want articulate, acknowledge. You want actionable verbs. So you want people to acknowledge our differences, value our differences, appreciate our differences, and celebrate our differences. That's the goal of these conversations. And to Dr. Couch's point, the problem is that early in the summer, and I'm just gonna go straight for the jugular right now. We had people who tried to capitalize monetarily on the moment. They went and picked up some quick books and read some things and went and did sessions and called everybody in the room racist, which is absolutely incorrect. And then when things got heated, they didn't know what to do because they're not trained to do this work. These upstart companies, these people who have educational consulting companies and then decided this summer, now they have an equity wing. This isn't y'all's lifelong work. This is and Dr. Couch and Dr. Malone, this is what we do. So we're not going to go into a classroom and tell a whole bunch of adults and children that all certain groups of people are racist. That's not what critical race theory does. We unpack the history and the structure around racism. That's what we do. Okay? So when we start to have these conversations and we allow children to unpack, then we get into the social emotional learning, which is also being banned in some states. You know why social emotional learning is being banned? Because social emotional learning allows you to feel what other people feel and experience. That's what starts to happen. So the goal is for people to engage in the conversation so we can establish critical thinking, critical consciousness, and what Dr. Gordon Muhammad calls criticality. Where when children leave our classroom, they start to unpack why things are, what caused it, and how did we get here. And let's move beyond the black-white binary. Because when children start to leave and become critical thinkers, they start to wonder, why is it my mom and dad got a letter in the mail telling them to come to court for back taxes while millionaires are not getting that same letter? Like today, they went and arrested Donald Trump's whatever he is, his CEO finance guy, and they're arguing that this is political. Like, how's that political? Regular people get that all the time when you don't pay your payroll tax. Like, people are getting arrested for PPP loans for saying they had businesses for payroll tax. So you're telling me that we can get arrested for not paying payroll tax, but y'all can't? So that's what this does. And then I'm going to end on this because Dr. Couch, you talked about that dynamic in the classroom. Let me give y'all an example of how to have a conversation about race and sexuality in a classroom. Let's imagine a classroom that is 100% white. To be culturally responsive and relevant, the conversation will be around how race was established in the early parts of the United States and how people who are not from Europe or certain parts of Europe were not considered white. Irish, Italian, Spanish, and it wasn't until Bacon's Rebellion. See, that's when we start going deep and people start to unpack what race really is. It's power and privilege and economics. So that's why you have Irish people and Italian people saying, hey, we were oppressed here too, and Polish people and German people. That's why they say that. Because in the early part of our founding country, before 1776, that was true. They weren't slaves. They were indentured servants. They weren't slaves. Let's just be real. You weren't slaves. You were indentured servants. But that's the way that conversation would unpack. Let's unpack the racial dynamics, and we would focus specifically in those groups. Why would I bring up? I may talk about slavery in all of this, but if I'm culturally responsive to my white students and culturally relevant to my white students, that's where we would go. This is what people aren't understanding about teachers in P12. We're not just walking in and only talking about slavery. We're talking about the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about Japanese internment camps. We're talking about the border crisis right now.
Right.
We're talking about Chinese Americans on the transatlantic railroad. We're talking about Polish and Irish Americans in New York. We're talking about all of it. We're not just talking about Black people in slavery. We're talking about Native Americans in the Trail of Tears. We're talking about all of it. But what's happening is people is making it black and white. They're trying to keep it in that binary. And when you keep things in a binary, that's white supremacy. That's what that is. Go look it up. It's in Google. Go look it up.
I love it. I love it. That was a great answer.
Yeah.
Dr. Griffin, I can't hear you talking anymore. It looks like you're still talking, but we can't hear you for a moment. So I don't know. Did you want to wrap that up? The last thing I heard you say was about, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. What's happening is we have a internet connectivity issue, so I had to cut my video off.
Oh, okay. I got you. That's fine. No problem. So the last thing you were saying about that you're teaching all of it, go Google it. Did you say anything after that?
No, that's it. Just like go Google what I'm telling you, what we're telling you. Go. I mean, I don't get it. Go Google. Go to Google Scholar. It's free. Go to Google Scholar. Go Google all the terms that we're throwing out. Go Google it and read it. Matter of fact, go to YouTube and put those terms in there. People have videos on this stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, you always got to triangulate the information now because anybody can publish on Google, right? So we got to have some critical thinking in that aspect. I don't really know what to really follow with. I think Dr. Couch and Dr. Griffin did a great job in talking about how to have discussions in the classroom. Well, I'm a college professor, so I'm not going to act like I can talk to how K through 12 teachers, do the work in the classroom. I'm trying to think in my experience where race was the conversation, particularly in my history class, and I don't remember much of it. But I do think, and again, this gets back to this storytelling. I think what teachers can do is start to bring in these authors from these backgrounds. So let's say if you want to talk about the civil rights movement, well, there was also a Chicano movement going on, right? There was also a yellow power movement going on. There was also a red power movement going on. So don't just make the civil rights movement about a lot of Black folks, some white folks, and there was a whole bunch of folks there. Mm-hmm. So bring their stories to the front table so that one, that does show culturally, responsive teaching, I think, but also just the pluralism that the U.S. has. Mm-hmm. I do think it's something that we just need to dive into more, and not just that period, other periods. So while Manifest Destiny was going on, right, and somehow there's some virtue, right, with that, right? Manifest Destiny, it was just God bestowed it upon us to just rape, pillage, and steal land. Like, what? But do we hear it that way in class? Not at all. But that's too explicit. Well, that's the truth. Mm-hmm. Stealing people's land, that's the truth. They say the truth should set you free. This is why we're still, caged in, because we just won't acknowledge that. Now, at what age do we do that? I don't know. Again, I'm not an expert in K through 12 curriculum building, blah, blah, blah. But once your children come to Dr. Malone's class, you get the truth from different angles. Because again, a big thing I push is triangulating. So I can tell you something. I will try to bring in other sources to help triangulate. I will try to bring both sides so you can get a comprehensive understanding of this event, how it impacted these different populations, and so on and so forth. And so that's how that will work on the college team. But at a K through 12, I do think part of it is also knowing yourself. So as a teacher, what are you comfortable with if you're going to talk about race? Now, obviously, I'm assuming you're going to be comfortable with your content area. You went to school and you trained in it, you've practiced it. But if you're going to have these kind of conversations, how are you comfortable with it? But also, like your students, like they're living a life outside of the schoolhouse. You may not know what's going on behind closed doors. If we want to keep it on race, Dr. Couch mentions Joe Fagan. He has a book, Front Stage, Backstage Racism. Am I right there, Dr. Couch? And so with that, it's about performance. So you may be doing one thing behind the scenes, but in the front stage, you're putting on a face. We have these different frames in which we talk and live and interact with one another. So if you're bringing these super progressive ideas, in your classroom, but then the kids are going home to a place in the backstage where that's not really going on, yes, there's going to be a lot of clash. And then what happens? And they bring it back into the classroom. Then now you, as a teacher, have to reconcile with that. And so, so all to say, this is a very complex issue. I didn't know that teachers were actually talking about race and gender things in the classroom to this extent. Is this a part of this misinformation, or are teachers actually doing this?
Right. So let me add to you with something real quick, Dr. Malone, because I want to make sure we clarify something.
Okay.
Just because we get to a conversation about racial history, that does not make that critical race theory.
Correct.
See, people think that if you talk about race in the classroom, it's critical race theory. If you look at the curriculums across this country, the state curriculums, it says we will unpack this from diverse perspectives.
It does, yep.
We will talk about the history of racism and how it led to the civil rights movement. That's not critical race theory. That's just what we talk about. So when we're talking about teachers talking about race, we're not talking about stopping the classroom and talking about race. We're talking about within the curriculum that is already there, that now states like Texas and Florida are trying to rewrite the curriculum and take all of that out. That's been in the curriculum. So now let's just take it all out because people are uncomfortable. Well, the issue is that you have folks who, and there are certain developments that I do in my consulting, but that we do in my own network. Like when we get to this part of the curriculum, we have to norm on how to have this conversation. There are preparations that we put in place that we let children know up front. The text you are about to read has problematic language in it. Like if we read The Diary of Anne Frank, we're going to stop and say, you're going to hear words in here that are going to be problematic and maybe triggering for people who might be Jewish and people who might be German. Notice how I said The Diary of Anne Frank, because I don't think they're going to remove the Holocaust from Texas and Florida. Because if we're not going to talk about racism, the Holocaust shouldn't be in there either then, right? You know what I'm saying? So, because I'm going there. So we got to make sure that the people understand that this is in the curriculum, it's been in the curriculum. That's not critical race theory. And two, when we talk about norming, a lot of like the staff I work with, we norm around Glenn Singleton's Courageous Conversations, where everyone is allowed to speak their truth. Everyone speaks their truth and they accept discomfort and they accept non-closure. That when I end this session or this classroom, I may have more questions, critical thinking, that I may want to ask and talk further about, either with my family or with other teachers or with my friends. And we create the condition where people can have a restorative conversation in the classroom. As a former, when I was a high school principal, we did that. When things happened in the community, sometimes our staff would pause because children need to process. And we would do a restorative circle where children could process for 10 to 15 minutes of what just happened in the community. And guess what we did? We took those same restorative circles and we applied it to math, science, history, language arts, and all the electives. Kids would get into a circle and have a conversation about a novel and something they found connected to the community, and everybody normed on how to engage in that conversation. Everyone's not trained in that. That's what we need to do. Provide the resources to provide the training to engage, including parents. Because we have school systems who actually have that for parents. I know because I did it for a group of parents where we talked to them about how to engage with your children around difficult conversations, not just race. It can be economics. It could be the COVID-19 vaccine. How do I talk to my kids about COVID-19 vaccine and why certain groups of people are dying and why we can't go see grandma?
Mhm.
You see what I'm saying? So they don't want to lie. They want to tell their kids the truth as to why you can't go outside and play and why you can't go to the pool. So that's what this needs is people understanding that there is a way to do this and it's not separate from the curriculum. It is happening as a part of the curriculum. It's been there since the 70s, I believe. It's always been there. It's just that now people are putting everything under critical race theory, and that's not correct.
Yeah, I'll just dovetail with something that you said. I was at home with 4 kids this year in my learning pod. Only two were mine. But there was a 5th grader who was learning about, I think it was in social studies class, and they were teaching about the birth of like suburbs and how they were like single family homes and that they first were developed, outside of cities. And they were like sort of these, bedroom communities where families would live and then commute in. And my blood was about to boil because I was like, they're not going to talk about how it was only white people that was allowed in there. Like seriously, this is ridiculous. And I was like, had drafted an email to the school about how terrible this was. Came back the next day, we picked up social studies class, and that was the next phase. And it started talking about all the racial dimensions of how communities are built and redlining. It talked about redlining for 5th grade. And I was like, okay, I'm glad I didn't send that email. But it was like, that's the way young kids, the way they process information is different than like me. I'd want to know all of it at once, right? For my college kids, you just put it all out there. But for elementary kids, like you take it step by step. And, the kids have lots of questions. They're like, that's not fair. The first thing they say, that's not fair. Why'd they do that? And I was like, well, people were kind of racist back then. And then it dovetailed into like, well, all these things are what led to the civil rights movement. Then there's a whole unit on Dr. King, even maybe a little bit about Malcolm X. So, I feel like y'all are talking about that. I like what you said, Dr. Griffen, about the restorative conversations. Like, I had to do those with the kids because we were homeschool learning. And actually my curriculum was bought by the county. It was from Florida. But it was really well done. Now, was it as radical as I would want it to be? No, of course not. But was it at least opening up the issues and being honest about American history? Yes, it was. And, this is not new. This is not something that we need to like put back into Pandora's box. It's not going to go back into Pandora's box. So we do need to learn how to have these kinds of conversations. And that takes a skill, right? And most teachers go into teaching because they have a passion, right? And they want to have these conversations. They want to shape young children. They want to be having an impact on people's lives. And so, the more skills that we could teach teachers in order to how to have these hard conversations, the better. And I, from what I can tell, they're doing a great job with it. And I'm here in deep red South Carolina, and, there's good coming out of it.
And you know what, Juliana, what you just described, let me give you an example of what happens when you do that. So my high school where I was a principal, when former President Trump was elected, our Latin American and Latinx students were afraid, okay? And then he signed the executive orders about the travel ban. So I have Muslims practicing students with hijabs in my school. I have Latinx students thinking they're going to get deported because some of them are DACA, okay? And then we have students who support Donald Trump in the school. And you would think that it would be a conflict. No. When you have these conversations and you have been doing this in your school, that child who supports Donald Trump is respected by his very friends or her friends or their friends. And they're like, okay, you support Trump, we don't. This is why we're afraid. Restorative conversation, restorative circle. They're conversating, they're conversing, they're debating, class is over, they walk to lunch together.
Right.
Because everyone matters. We have a right to our opinion. We have a right to our experience. All I'm asking you to do is acknowledge, value, and appreciate and celebrate my difference. That's all we're asking you to do. Those are the 4 things: acknowledge, value, appreciate, celebrate. And I guarantee you, give kids more credit. Kids know what's happening. And when you try to keep stuff from kids and in their emotions, they don't know how to deal with stuff, that's when you start having these situations and these tensions. Kids have to engage because they're going to be our leaders and they're going to have to engage. Wonder why we keep having this partisan mess going on with our nation's leaders right now, because they were never taught how to engage. They don't know how to engage in civil discourse. We're trying to teach our children not to be you. We need civil discourse in this country.
Right.
Preach.
Exactly. Preach.
I gotta say, I'm a little impressed that 5th graders are learning this, because I mean, I was in 5th grade in like 2000 or 2001, and I don't remember none of it. I don't remember anything. We did not learn anything like this. I am from Pennsylvania, so I live in South Carolina now. So even up in Pennsylvania, you know, there was really no racial teaching. I don't recall learning about suburbs, Julinna. So I definitely did not learn about redlining in 5th grade.
Yeah, no, I was surprised. They even talked about, and I'm not going to remember the name of it now, but the first suburb, which was up in Long Island, y'all might remember the name of it. I can't remember the name of it. It's a real famous one. But no, they talked about that.
Yeah, that was the result of Brown v. Board of Education when you started seeing it. So again, every time there's some type of racial tension or whatnot, there's always a backlash. And that backlash is in the result of either people trying to go find their own communities, found their own schools. What we're seeing right now, and this is a big old band-aided, holistic paintbrush approach. We're going to get rid of all of it. So if we get rid of all of it, it's going to go away. No, it's not. No, it's not.
Oh, Julinna, it's Levittown.
Levittown, that was it. Thank you. Yes, they actually talked about Levittown.
Someone watching.
I learned about Levittown like, I don't know, 8 years ago. Like, this is so, I mean, it is a benefit to the kids.
Yeah.
So doing it all early.
So I think we have one more question. Then we did have a couple comments and questions that I'll read to y'all after I ask this last question. And really, so obviously, you know, like we've discussed, this isn't new. This has been around for a long time, whether people have known about it or not. Do you think all the attention that's being brought to critical race theory, is it ultimately good or is it bad? Obviously, you know, some of these bills, they once again do not actually target what CRT is. It seems like they want to ban all discussion of racism, of history from this country that may not paint white people in a particularly good light. Something I've heard spoken by either board members or parents here in Horry County was that they don't want to make the little white children like upset or like feel bad. Really, I don't see any teacher making any kid feel bad while discussing the history of the country and the things that we have done in this country. So really, do you think it's good attention or bad attention? How do you think this is going to play out?
I don't know that I necessarily think that it is either good or bad, because I don't know that the attention is actually on critical race theory as an academic perspective and as a theoretical tool. I don't think that that's where the focus is. I think what is being done can have a negative impact, particularly as it relates to discourse. And again, as Dr. Griffen was saying, our ability to have the conversations. Because I was looking over some of the comments leading up to the event today, and I saw someone saying something to the effect of, you know, this is just a racist event that y'all are having. And right, but the ability to be dismissive of something that is believed to be a part of this broader thing that is actually not even a part of. So I don't know that it will have necessarily a positive or negative impact on critical race theory itself. But I think if we don't navigate this time well, it can further damage the way in which we have meaningful discourse, or we're not having meaningful discourses, a lack of meaningful discourse surrounding equity issues, broadly speaking.
I'll take a shot at it. So as I'm thinking about this question, I'm thinking about it on several levels. I went so high to think about just the idea of our First Amendment, right? The freedom of speech, particularly as it pertains to education, like with teachers. Now, in the academy, we have the academic freedom, but even in that, we have limitations. If you're at a public institution and things of that nature, you got a certain set. I'm at a private institution. So for the most part, we model that, but at the same time, there are things we have to think about. But this has been handled, in some cases in the Supreme Court. So you can look at Sweezy. There's been a few ones that actually delineate what you can discuss in class. And so one of my things I'm thinking about as far as what critical race theory means for this is, I'm thinking outside the box as far as like, is this going to actually erode or challenge some First Amendment rights of our teachers? So are these bills aligning with some established court cases? And so that's one thing I think about, and I think that's actually good. That makes people want to be more informed and engaged citizens. So not just say I have free speech, but how free is it? As far as we're talking about CRT as a discipline, all this did was give it free publicity. So now a lot of other people who didn't know about it in the academy probably want to actually look at it now. So in my time as a professor, I've had literally one student use critical race theory in a paper that actually was doing a critical content analysis of Donald Trump's tweets. And it was actually a pretty good paper. But it's not it's not like a popular theory amongst the academy in general. A lot of it is in law school, but even then it's, in a particular corner. But, out of it, we do have these different intersections. So you have lit crit, queer quit, Asian crit, like you have these different iterations, and it's in these different fields. And so what this has done is actually bring it to the forefront. So more academics are probably interested in it. But if we're talking about like the common public opinion, if we are in agreement that there's this has been used as fear mongering and things of that nature, we're going to find
Dr. Rose.
I think you just froze.
Yes.
Rose. Okay. Yeah. Well, Dr. Malone already mentioned Latin crit, queer crit, sped crit, feminist crit, Black feminist crit. So there are multiple critical pedagogies and critical frameworks out there. So to answer your question, I see it a little in the middle, and I agree with Dr. Couch. Can't really see it as a bad or good when it isn't about critical race theory. That's just the buzzword, what folks are looping in. But the bad thing about this right now is that it is creating unnecessary and intentional fear and harm psychologically and emotionally, physiologically to segments of our population. The very segment of our population who feels that the election was stolen is being further triggered and harmed. And then the segment of our population who doesn't feel that the election was stolen, but wants to get back to a sense of normalcy, is now feeling like, oh no, here's another divisive issue. Okay, so there's harm being caused on all fronts. And then the good is now what's going to happen, what has happened is we're going to have educators that are going to double down because we're tired of you telling us what we can and can't do.
Yeah.
None of you are qualified to evaluate my classroom. You're not qualified to write my curriculum. None of you are certified according to No Child Left Behind and everything. We have to be certified to be a teacher. We have to be certified to be a principal. There are all these certificates and degrees we got to have none of you are even qualified to write curriculum and to question how I teach. And I'm saying it just like that. You're not qualified. Okay? So what's happening is you're going to have educators who are going to say no. And I'm not just talking about Black educators. All educators, a lot of educators are going to sit around and go, no, this is not okay. Because when people start to learn the other frameworks, they're not going to teach critical race theory and Latin crit and feminist crit and queer crit. I'm throwing them all out there from what Dr. Malone was saying, so y'all can go research it. They're going to apply the lens to everything we do. Like the example I gave 2 days ago with the Spurs was when I apply the lens of critical race theory, I apply it across all races. I'm talking about when my graduation rate went up and my boss walked in and said, hey, your graduation rate went up, but your white male SPED students, special education service students, are at a 67% graduation rate. What are you going to do about that? So if I was using critical race theory the way people said it is, I would have ignored it. No, we went and looked and saw what policy do we have in place that is causing my white male special education students to not graduate. Oh, we have this policy that when you walk out of class, you get sent home. So if they have accommodations and modifications, we shouldn't be doing that. So we changed the policy. We changed the structure. We set a policy that we will no longer suspend any special needs kid for these things. And guess what? Their graduation rate went up. Discipline went down. So that's how you apply these frameworks. You apply them to look at what is happening and look at structures and figure out how to disrupt and dismantle structures that cause oppressive harms to multiple groups. And when Dr. Couch and Dr. Malone keep saying this isn't just about critical race theory, it's not about critical race theory, LGBTQIA community, this is about you too. That's why they banned sexuality training too. What is it? Sex sensitivity training. This is beyond race. This is a bigger issue. And people are now saying critical race theory is anti-Bible and all this. I'm like, what? I'm like, come on, don't have me say Jesus would have been a critical race. Don't have me say that. Because Jesus was for all people. See? And Jesus, and he targeted the marginalized and most vulnerable people first. Didn't Jesus do that in the Bible? That's what Jesus did. He didn't target the wealthy. He didn't target the affluent. The most vulnerable and marginalized segments is what Jesus used in the Bible. That's what Jesus targeted. Critical race theory, when you use that framework, it's about the most vulnerable and targeted and marginalized groups. So you can say it's anti-Bible all you want, and we can go back and forth on this. But yeah, that's the good I see out of it, is that we're going to see people using other frameworks to make positive decisions for multiple groups of children, regardless of race.
Do you think, is there anything that parents should be doing to support the K through 12 teachers and, you know, like the supportive principals and the supportive board members in the face of criticism? Like you've seen all these absolutely ridiculous and wild school board meetings. And we kind of have this sort of thing going on here, not that I've seen any out of hand meetings, but that our school board chairman and some other school board members have said some very just totally uneducated things about it and just misinformed criticisms of critical race theory and what, is actually being taught in classrooms. So if there's anything you think that parents should be doing to show support, that would be great. I think there would be some people interested in like how they can, kind of keep this issue at the forefront and the importance of it.
So I would personally say that I think a big thing that parents can do, one would be go to some school board meetings. Two, help vote for some school board stuff to help get people into those spaces that can really influence those decisions. I think that is something that's rather practical that parents can do. So I think getting involved in voting and getting in there with the school board is very important on the ground. But also, I think the other thing that parents can do is actually, as the other panelists have been saying tonight, is actually do some research yourself as to what this stuff actually is. The text that Malone had up by Richard Delgado is a perfect place to look at for a very tight summation of what critical race theory is. So if parents could do some research themselves, that would be a way that could help support. But then getting involved in school board stuff, I think, is a wonderful tactic that can be employed.
Thank you, Dr. Cowles. That's right. That's like perfect. Like show up to the school board meetings. Show up to the school board meetings and have your public comment. And I would challenge, and this is my call to action. Go study the text. Study Dr. Delgado's work, but apply the critical race theory tenet. And the ones I'm talking about, not the racism is endemic and normal, not the fact that we have interest convergence where dominant groups will converge their interests with a marginalized group in the economic interest, not that one. Counter storytelling and counter narratives. To do that, parents, go have conversations and hear, acknowledge, appreciate, value, and celebrate people's experiences and take that to the school board. Because when we're talking about, we're not going to have any conversations around race and sexism and all these things, and the child is called the N-word, or a child is bullied because they've come out as LGBTQIA. But the school is not permitted to have conversations around that, nor be proactive and preemptive. Because schools are proactive and preemptive by having conversations about what language we're not going to tolerate in our school. And you have parents that get upset, well, you shouldn't be talking about that. Well, guess what? According to the 10th Amendment, which is what they're talking about, according to the 10th Amendment, curriculum and education is all relegated to the state. The federal government has no say in it, okay? That's the 10th Amendment, okay? But the 14th Amendment says we are to have the equal protection of laws. So understand that if we're not having conversations with children and adults about what we're not going to have inside our school and why certain language is problematic and how we came to be, when people go to school and bully and use racist terms, that's how you get yourself into a 14th Amendment lawsuit. See, this is what people aren't thinking about. See, this is what critical consciousness and critical thinking gets you. You're going to get yourself into a 14th Amendment lawsuit. So parents, go get you some counter narratives and walk into the school board and share the experiences of people and say, you explain to me, you ask the school board, when this happens at a school, how do you recommend the school address this? How do we prevent this from happening? That's why the historical circles, the conversations are so important, because the more conversations children engage in, the less likely and the less harm is going to be caused when those things happen. But if you want to not talk about it, when the child comes to school and throws up a racist or homophobic or a sexist term, now we're in reactive mode. Now we're reacting. And that's when people make bad decisions and make missteps versus being proactive on the front end.
That's great. That's great. I love that advice. So, Dr. Malone, I see you just called in. Ashlyn had asked the final question, and the final question was, what can parents do, parents who are not like in support of these initiatives trying to take down critical race theory? And we had a couple different answers, and the answers were basically get engaged, show up to the school board meetings, pay attention, try to, and look at like what the school's doing in terms of being proactive and reactive. And then we had a call to action by Dr. Griffen. So do you have any thoughts on that question of what we can do to try to be supportive as parents?
Well, someone that has a now 2-year-old, I think it's imperative that we don't avoid, apparently my personal cell is on the screen.
Oops. We can block that.
There you go. So tell Dr. Couch thanks, or he can hear me. Thanks, Dr. Couch. So having honest conversations about the history of race, it's a tough one. It's a necessary one. You got to be engaged with just, what's going on in the country, now what's going on in your house, what's going on with other groups that you interact with or your kids interact with. I think that's very important. If you're at the school, try to be as involved as you can be. But you have to have a good pulse, a good range of folks who can give you different perspectives about what's going on. Like what we see a lot is a lot of groupthink and just, hey, I just want to be with the people who think like me. No one who's going to challenge me, because if I have to be challenged, then I have to be able to defend my position. And again, I guess it gets to civil discourse. And so I think those are a couple of things I think, parents can do, because ultimately our kids are watching. Your kids are watching how you move in this world. So you have to be able to model that behavior. So if you model avoidance, everything that you model, all those behaviors, they get mapped onto them. And then they go out into the world and they're getting mapped on from all these different socialization basis. So school, the home, if you're a part of church, these organizations, all those different things matter. And your kids are going to try to triangulate behaviors and feelings. And so parents have to be able to kind of have a good pulse on those things. And so, of course, being involved, having honest conversations about just these different social identities that we have and what's going on with these groups. So humanizing those groups, not quick to say, oh, it doesn't mean anything because here's a stigma we're going to put on. They're lazy, they're this, they're that, they're liberal, they're conservative. Like, no, get to who they are as people. And let's not overgeneralize these individuals. And so I think that's a starting place. And even there, you're going to find yourself, dealing with some hard truths about yourself. And then you grow from there. But ultimately, the behavior you do and model your children are going to grab onto. So I'll leave you with that.
Yeah, oh, wait. I just thought about something. Dr. Malone, you made me think about something. I know you said, what can parents do? Said, what can parents do? You remember this summer when I just saw this thing on Facebook about the LGBTQI flag that everybody's throwing it now. They said this is all of America corporations. And then on 12/01 on July 1st, they threw the flag. All these corporations and all these businesses, hospitals, colleges, everybody who stood in solidarity this summer around racism. Where are you right now? Where are you right now? We need businesses, we need hospitals, we need universities to show up at the board meeting. You're a part of the community too. You are a stakeholder in these school districts, in these communities, and you should be showing up. Manager of Walmart, the director at the hospital, the university president, who claim to be an equal and opportunity employer, who claim to have this inclusive and diverse, you should be at the school board meeting letting people know that critical race theory is not what people are saying it is. And it is very important that our nation's children learn about the history of racism, sexism, homophobia, and all these things in this country and how it impacts our economic standing, because there is an economic impact. There is a world impact. There is a health impact. There's multiple impacts. Y'all need to come and join us in solidarity, because you in solidarity this summer. Don't just do it when it's popular. Do it right now when you can lose your business. Do it right now. Don't worry. We'll come and make sure you make your money. That's called interest convergence. See, I'm trying to help you. That's another thing. That's interest convergence.
That's another tenant. Yeah.
You'll get your money, but we need you to show up.
I love it.
Yes, yes, I totally agree.
Well, y'all have inspired me tonight. I'm feeling motivated. I'm feeling like I learned something. I got a whole page here of notes that I took. So always have something to learn. Always have something new to learn.
Absolutely.
So thank y'all. This has been a thoroughly wonderful discussion. Dr. Griffin, we especially appreciate you showing up from Colorado. I mean, I love my South Carolina compatriots here, but it is real nice to have some support from the, you know, progressive Colorado.
Yeah.
Just so you know, we're purple. We're
You're
purple.
purple. Okay.
Yes. I mean, we're blue, but we're a purple state.
Yeah, that's the reality of it. So,
Yeah.
well, y'all, I hope to, Todd, Danny, I hopefully maybe we'll cross paths in the future since you're only a little bit up the road.
That's
So,
right.
thank y'all so
Yeah.
much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. This was great.
Thank y'all.
Yes,
Dr.
thank you.
Couch, nice meeting you, sir.
Nice to meet you too.
Yes, it was wonderful to meet all of y'all. So, and thank
Absolutely.
you for organizing. Good job. Ashlyn.
Thank
Yes.
you. Have a good evening, everybody. And
All
if
right.
you're just tuning in on Facebook,
All right.
you can watch it when we're done. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank y'all.
Bye-bye.
Have a good evening.
You too.